Good afternoon and welcome everybody, and good morning to those joining us from the Americas. Welcome to our webinar on energy access in West Africa. We're going to be hearing some reports on the findings and technologies that were explored in the Energy Access Africa project during this webinar. Today's presenters, and that project was funded under the Energy Catalyst Programme by Innovate UK, part of UKRI, the UK's Research and Innovation Agency. Today's presenters are going to be Simon Igufose, the project lead and chief executive of Pyrogenesis, Professor Kevin Tansey from the University of Leicester, John O'West from Mobile Power, Laura Alliston from Acceleron, and Andrew Atiko from Mobinet. During the webinar, there's going to be a chance for you to ask questions, either for us about the webinar or to ask questions for the presenters, and questions and discussion topics for the Q&A session at the end. So if you enter your question at the bottom of the screen under the Q&A tab, then those questions will come through to us and we will ask them at the end or answer them during the webinar, whichever is the most appropriate. I should also say part of the purpose of this webinar is to introduce you to the technologies and to the companies who are presenting them. If you'd like to contact any of the presenters after the webinar, please do email us on the contact address that was in your confirmation email, and we will pass your questions and your messages on to the relevant presenter and the relevant company. So my name is Bernie Jones, and I run an organisation called Smart Villages Research Group. Since 2012, we've been looking at new ways to achieve energy access and rural development around the world. And the model that we came up with is a holistic one. So it's looking at integrated development where organizations look at the challenges of the whole community and try to work with the community to implement sustainable solutions to all of those challenges put together. So for us, energy is a catalyst in achieving those solutions, but it's not the end goal in itself. Energy is used to help stimulate entrepreneurship or education or health solutions or improve food security. So I first met Simon, the chief exec of Pyrogenesis, 2 years ago, and I was really struck by how the technology that Pyrogenesis has been working on actually manages to achieve a whole number of these integrated objectives with just one technology. So that's why I was so excited to hear about what they were doing. And it's been a real pleasure for me to follow the work that Pyrogenesis and all of their partners have been doing through this project, the Energy Access Africa project, over the last 16 months. Because in a very real sense, all those diverse technologies are all coming together to help achieve that integrated solution for achieving rural energy access in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So to remind you, both of those countries in West Africa have quite low energy access levels, below 25% in each country. And in the rural areas, energy access is below 6%, even according to the latest statistics. This report that you can see here on your screen by SE for All has come out very recently, talking about mini-grids in Sierra Leone. And it highlights in its conclusions that working on mini-grids is as challenging in Sierra Leone as it has been elsewhere in the world. And in particular, it's quite challenging to try and implement them on a centrally planned basis. They did find, however, that the rate of electricity usage in rural areas increases by more than 20 times when a good mini-grid or a good energy provision solution is available. So that's a great market for people to enter and for the partners in this project to be able to enter and be able to contribute their technologies and their business models too, and also to be able to generate a tremendous amount of impact. Before we go on to listen to the presentations, we have a couple of polls which we'd like to run just to find out a little bit about you, our audience. So the first poll, which is coming up on your screen at the moment, is where in the world you're based. Where are you joining us from today? And if you can click on one of the click buttons on your screens, we'll leave this open for a few more seconds yet. That will just be interesting for us, but also help the presenters tailor their presentations, knowing where people are joining us from. I'll leave it open for another 5 or 10 seconds to get any final responses. Good. Well, I can see that I was just sharing the result with you now. So I can see that I was right in saying good afternoon to everybody, because happily all the participants in the webinar are based in Africa and Europe. So it is a little bit too early for our friends in the Americas to be joining us, but I'm sure they can see the recorded version of the webinar on the website later on. So the second poll that I'd like to run now is, what sector are you in, or what is your interest in the presentations that we're going to hear from today? Again, if we spend a little bit of time clicking on these, that will be interesting for us, but also a good way of being able to tailor the presentations that we're going to hear. I'll leave this open for another few seconds. Any final responses that we get? And publish the results so that everybody can see it. So that's interesting. We have a nice mixture of people, happily people from the general public who are just interested in what we're doing, which is very encouraging. Some people from the corporate sector, people working probably in energy-related businesses themselves, people from research joining us, and also we're very excited to see one person from a funding agency as well. So I'm sure everybody will be very pleased if they make contact later. Right, so without further ado, I think we will move on into our presentations. And first I will invite Simon Igafosi from Pyrogenesis to talk about the Pyrogenesis technology and his work in leading the project. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Bernie. I'll just share my screen. Hold on a second. Yeah, I need to share my screen. Right. Tab. There we go. Just let me know that you can see this, yeah? Can you see that, Bernie?
Yes, we can see that.
Brilliant stuff. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody, and thank you for being with us today. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pyrogenesis. We're a bioenergy and biofuels technology developer. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our technology today, and also, you know, we really focus on building supply chains to solve these complex problems that Bernie was talking about. And, you know, our primary market focus is sub-Saharan Africa. And really, with energy access, one of the biggest problems has been that in many African communities, they're starting from a very low base of actually using energy. So it might cost you $250,000 to put in a mini grid, but the community might only consume about $5,000 a year. So in those kind of scenarios, how do we distribute energy profitably? And so really, this is one of the key challenges, but also with the technology that we've developed, it's based on converting waste biomass. So we needed to check a few different things in order to see that we could come up with a viable business model that would attract investment to enable us to put the type of hardware and infrastructure into these communities to provide them with energy access. So lots of complex technical and commercial challenges that had to be overcome, hence why we had to build a supply chain with excellent partners that you're going to meet later on today. So let me tell you a little bit about our pyrochemy process. I'm a chemical engineer, as my co-founder and our other team, you know, we've invented this technology that converts agricultural waste. And I think in this diagram, what's really good that you can see is that the agricultural products are below ground typically, and then the stuff that's growing above ground is really stuff that's discarded in the fields afterwards. It has no value, it doesn't get used for anything, it just, you know, it gets burnt indiscriminately. So it's not a commodity, it's not being sold, and therefore it is a genuine waste which we can utilize in our machine. So it's, well, how we you know, do that is that we can create employment by you know, mobilizing these farming communities to gather the waste from the fields, gleaning the waste, and then collecting it, aggregating it, and then we would then feed that into our machine. And our machine is based on a pyrolysis technology, hence pyrochemy. And this is an advanced thermal technology that uses high temperatures without oxygen to thermally separate the volatile matter, which converts into like smoke, if you like, or vapors, and then the solid matter, which is converted into like a charcoal substance, which we call biochar. So in this diagram here, we always produce biochar, and that's like a charcoal substance, as I said. Now, that charcoal substance doesn't give off much smoke because in our process, we've removed most of that smoke as the volatile vapors. And that means that we could displace charcoal that's currently being used and produced, through traditional methods, which is a quite smoky fuel, with something that is a smokeless fuel. And that's going to have health benefits for people if they're still using charcoal for cooking. Alternatively, and what I think is more powerful, is when we use the biochar as a soil amender. And we can put it into agricultural soils. And that means that farmers need less water and less fertilizers, because the biochar itself acts as some form of like a sponge, if you like. And so it therefore holds on to the nutrients and the water in the soil. And that means farmers don't need to apply so much fertilizer or water, and especially if they're in very dry conditions. So the vapors, we can convert those vapors, because they still have a lot of energy in them, into renewable electricity, low carbon heat, and from the heat, we can also produce cooling using absorption chilling. Now, if we're not doing those things, then we can also use that vapor and we can condense it into something called bio-oil. And that bio-oil, we can upgrade it. We've developed a method in one of our other projects in Ethiopia to upgrade it to kerosene. So kerosene is a very useful and portable fuel for cooking and for lighting. And also with the same project partner, we've developed a diesel blending component. So that means that off-grid communities in remote parts of Africa can be converting their agricultural waste into commodities that can be exported into local, regional, national, or even global markets. So that's what makes the pyrochemy process so powerful, because as well as giving them access to electricity and low carbon heat, which they can typically use for crop drying or other agricultural processes, they can have exportable commodities that can earn them additional income or even foreign exchange. And so this is what makes our technology so exciting, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa. Right. One of the things, of course, with biomass is that we need to know that there's going to be enough quantities available in the location where we're going to, and also the right type of biomass. So this is why we had to use geospatial techniques, and we focused on Sierra Leone for doing this. So therefore we use like satellite images, and this helped us as a detection tool to make sure that we had sufficient agricultural resources available in the locations that we wanted to assess to see if there's a viable business case. A viable business case means that we have to be within a fairly close proximity. The agricultural waste has to be fairly close to major rural settlements. And that's typically populations of about 5,000 people or above, because the amount of electricity that they consume is so low, it takes about 5,000 people to consume the 100 kilowatts that our system generates. Yeah. We then carried out field work, and the field work was to identify agro processors. So these are factories that are using the raw materials that are coming from these farming communities and converting them into higher value goods. And so we felt that agro processors were a great kind of starting point in these communities to launch from. And in the process, we selected 4 agro processing facilities that use heat and electricity. And so we're going to have a closer look at those. We're in the process of doing that now to see how the business case stacks up. So what does geospatial analysis look like? Well, on the right-hand side at the bottom, you can see what's typically like a Google Earth or, type of map. But you can't really tell, from such a far away distance where the communities are. So we used a higher spatial resolution settlement layer, which is the bit above in black. And then that highlights, it stands out where these communities are. We knew where the locations of the agro processors were. Those are the yellow squares. And so the proximity circles are telling us how far are they. And typically we found that, the processing sites and the communities were within like 6 kilometers away, which is brilliant for the energy distribution models that mobile power and acceleron I'm going to talk to you about afterwards, using batteries rather than mini grids, because mini grids will only typically go up to like 1.5, 2 kilometers max, but we wanted to reach communities beyond that. Okay, so looking at those communities, we wanted to find out their distribution, we wanted to know how big the population was within them, and we also wanted to estimate their energy use. So these are all the different kind of things that we're using geospatial analysis for as a tool. And this is where we work very closely with the University of Leicester, who we've worked on in a previous project as well. Now, one of the things running such complex pieces of equipment is that we're going to need local people who will have to train. And in creating technical roles locally, we want to make sure that we were addressing gender equality and social inclusion. So from a previous project, we identified that in somewhere like Nigeria, 20% of the engineers in that country are women. And we wanted to make sure that we can recruit and provide technical opportunities to women in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So we did some work and we thought, right, well, what are the skills that we're going to need? And also, you know, how are we going to train people to acquire these skills? And then also, how are we going to attract them to, you know, get to know about us and make the roles that we've got appealing? So this was a whole focus within the project that my team members were working on, and we've learned a lot. We learned, for instance, that you know, women were more responsive to certain type of neutral coded language in the way that the job was advertised, and that would mean that we'd get a high number of applicants. So all of these things were learning points that we've now incorporated into our recruitment strategy, and we're hoping to get, you know, a good number of applications from women when we're going to be recruiting locally for plant operators and maintenance technicians. And this is going to be great and give them access to you know, employment in skilled roles. Now, it's not going to be,
Simon.
Okay, right, I'll wrap up then. So one of the other things is that we needed to get the news out there that, you know, this is what we're doing, this is how to engage with us. So social media, we had to develop a whole infrastructure and a platform. So we reached, you know, we had 140,000 views across both countries, in Sierra Leone and Liberia. You can see the other areas that we operate in Nigeria. And these are the platforms that we used. You can see Facebook was the highest number of views that we had, then Instagram, and most people don't use LinkedIn. Overall age ranges, 25 to 34-year-olds, by far the biggest age group that we engaged through social media. And then we did a good job on gender balance, you know, 40% were women, 60% men. Okay, so the other interesting thing is that most people were using mobile phones to access our social media platforms. And then that meant that we could develop social media content. So this is a video that you'll be able to go onto our website and play, although you can't hear it, sorry for that. Right, and this tells you all about the difference, hold on a second. This tells you all about the difference between carbon offsetting and carbon removal. And the reason that this is such an important topic at the moment is that you cannot achieve net zero by doing carbon offsetting. You can only achieve net zero if you remove carbon from the environment. And our technology actually does this. And this is what excites a lot of investors and will mean that they're putting their hands in their pockets to invest in technologies that are going to be financing projects in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's really why what we're offering is something that's very powerful. It's not just a powerful technology, it's got very powerful commercial business applications in Africa, perfectly suited to this market that we're hoping to establish and launch into with our partners and our supply chain partnerships that we're developing. So thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you're going to have a great time and learn a lot from our other presenters too. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon.
You're welcome.
Sharing those insights into all the work that you've been doing at Pyrogenesis. So without further delay, we will move on to our second presenter, Professor Kevin Tanzi, who is the Professor of Remote Sensing at the University of Leicester, without giving too much away about his presentation there. So over to you, Kevin, and indeed to our audience, please keep the questions coming in.
Thank you very much, Bernie and Simon. I'm just going to share my screen. So can everyone see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Kevin Tanzi, and this presentation involves also Mohamed Ozigis, Amin Kairoun, Sam Hopkinson, and John Cattell. And I think it's interesting just to note that Mohamed Ozigis was working for the project at University of Leicester. is now employed by Pyrogenesis to take forward some of that geospatial mapping that Simon referred to. So there's been some knowledge transfer between our respective organizations. So it's great that Simon's led this project, really led the way in thinking about using geospatial and satellite technologies. We've never been a better time to utilize and explore satellite data. So I guess this contribution sits within the realm of agri-tech. Simon first started asking lots of questions, and those questions are really around the crop waste residues that come from agricultural activity, which is distributed very abundantly across sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world. So hopefully this technology is transferable to other areas. What Simon wants to know and gain confidence around, and it is a confidence indicator, is that agricultural activity is taking place. It's been taking place for a while. Crops are being grown. We might be able to tell which crops are being grown without having to go and visit on the ground, to do this over very large areas, and also fundamentally to try and detect the harvest date. So as part of our first project with Simon, we had a first go at detecting the harvest date. So Simon would know that there's crop waste residue or waste biomass that's available to put into the machine to generate all these products as well. So we use satellite data to try and determine the harvest date for maize, rice, and also cassava, and this was our project took place in Nigeria. Now Simon is developing that and putting in resource and investment into those geospatial technologies alongside that population mapping to try and marry the supply and the demand. Now Simon is also very interested in kind of what might be the quality of the yield, and again, do we have confidence? We may be able to detect a harvest up to the present day, but do we have the confidence that that field has produced crops over the past several years? In which case, there'll be more than likely be waste residues in the forthcoming period. Again, it's a confidence indicator that siting a plant in a particular location is the right decision and optimizes the outputs and power and all these byproducts. So we started to look at Google Earth. I'm sure most of you have had a look at Google Earth for whatever reason, but Google Earth Engine is the cloud computing behind Google Earth. And what we wanted to see is, can we somehow see the signature of any agricultural field in sub-Saharan Africa, anywhere across the world really, and focus this on Sierra Leone and Liberia. We don't necessarily know what's being grown, but we can see those fields in a satellite image. And then can we look back over time, over the last 5 or 6 years, to see what is the signature of that field? I'm just going to switch to a different screen while I show you that. So here we've got Sierra Leone and Liberia. And if we zoom in, this is the kind of baseline Google map, but we can switch to the satellite data here. And we can see there's fields of activity, different types of field here, different types of crops being grown. I think these are irrigated crop circles. What we've developed is a tool where any user can identify a field. And here we've just simply drawn around what we think is a single field here. We've got another example further down in one of these crop circles. So anybody can draw a polygon. And then what we've done is developed a nice tool that looks back, in this case, to 2015, when one of these satellites was first launched. And we've managed to analyze 694 images. All of this is done in the cloud without downloading a single image to our local computer, which would take forever and be very difficult to process, and we'd probably crash a few computers by doing it. But we can use Google Earth Engine. And what it's doing, I can just show you a bigger picture of this. Yeah, hopefully you can see that on your screen. What we're seeing is the kind of like the time series, the behavior of this field since September 2015. And you can see the blue dots. This is the raw data. So it's very noisy because, of course, this satellite can't see through clouds. It's detecting the wet season, the dry season. And along this side, this axis here between 0.6 and -1, this is an indicator of the health of the vegetation layer sitting on the surface. So the higher the value, the more photosynthetically active is the vegetation. Now we interpret that in a crop field by being more crop cover, greener leaves, more photosynthetic activity, accumulating more biomass, and so on. And we can see that it's varying. And this is absolutely fine because this is the cycle of the harvest and crop growth period for different for the vegetation type that's been grown in that particular field over time. So we can see there are some similarities in the kind of growing season. This might be an important point in the growth of this crop. Here we've got 3 peaks, here we've got 2 peaks, here we're back to 3 peaks. So this is all information for decision makers to utilize, to relate to maybe crop yield, the quality of the crop, when the crop was harvested, the impact of maybe drought or pest on that particular field, and maybe that same feature happened in the past, and even just as the growing season has started, you might get a better idea about the potential yield. The yield may be related to the area under the curve. You can extract this information into a spreadsheet and perform more statistical analysis on that. And just to give you an indication of how quick this is, if I just quickly jump to site 2, here it'll go away, and this is performing it now in the cloud, and in a few minutes time the result will appear. Now we could do this all across the region. We can have identified particular fields, or what we can do, we can assimilate and aggregate this information over the regions that Simon's talking about, these kind of 6-kilometer radius circles, which are optimized to kind of yield the right amount of crop waste residue to power these machines. So we've literally just produced this over the last few weeks. We've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. I'm going to keep talking until the chart is generated, and it'll only be a few more seconds before that happens. And what we might be able to do from this, with further analysis from the field, the kind of information that Simon was talking about in his previous talk, is first of all identify the different type of crop without even going into the field, because you could base your assumption on that similar crops should have similar profiles in similar areas. Okay, you go a bit further away, maybe it's a slightly drier or slightly wetter, and you might have a slightly different profile. But the profiles should be reasonably similar over that time series. The profile for cassava, you'd expect to look very different to the profile for rice or maize, or what we've noticed, particularly in Sierra Leone, I think Liberia as well, the introduction of palm oil, which creates a completely different profile signature to one that we've seen before. You can see this profile is very different to the previous one. So there's a different crop that's being grown on this surface here. You can see some very distinct crop cycles here, much more distinct to this particular one here, where we see hardly any reduction in the health of vegetation over that period. So what we've provided for Simon, I believe, and Pyrogenesis and all the other partners involved, is intelligence coming from satellite data, processing it in the cloud without downloading a single image, enabling any user to identify any field of interest that they wish to analyze, such as these ones here that look very different to the fields that we've seen previously, understand what might be growing, build confidence that agricultural activity is taking place, note that the harvest periods are happening, which should generate waste residues, and then combine that with the information that Simon's looking at, and that's the distances between where the people are, where the processing plants are, to enable the optimization of the number of machines to maximise the output and provide critical employment, as Simon said, for local people. So if you have any more questions on the remote sensing technologies, very happy to get back to you afterwards or demonstrate some other sites if you have particular interest of location. But otherwise, I'll hand back to Bernie and for the rest of the seminar. And thank you very much for listening.
That's excellent, Kevin. Thank you very much for that presentation. And we have, in fact, had a couple of questions come in already, which we'll save for the Q&A session at the end. If anybody else has any questions, do send them in. We're keeping them all, and then we'll build a discussion around those at the end of the presentations. So it then gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce Laura Alliston, a head of grants and research at Acceleron, who will be telling us about some very novel first and second life lithium battery technology that Acceleron has been developing. And now over to you, Laura.
Thank you. I'm hoping this one's going to work. I just very quickly did it to PDF just in case. Hopefully we'll be okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Fantastic. Hi everyone. So my name's Laura Alliston. So I work as head of grants and research at Acceleron, and we produce batteries for life. So I'd just like to describe a bit about us and what we do first before I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do, particularly on the project. And really just the whole idea behind us as a company. So imagine you're driving down the road and something goes wrong with your car. You wouldn't scrap the vehicle, but you would get it repaired. So why don't we do this with batteries? Batteries are made up of hundreds of subcompartments, and typically if something's gone wrong in the battery, it would be one or two of these that have gone wrong. But because of how they're designed overall, we would need to throw the entire thing away, which just generates a lot of unnecessary waste of valuable assets and has a really poor environmental impact. And just some figures around what we're expecting those waste figures to look like from lithium batteries in the future. So by 2040, just from electric vehicles, never mind all the other home energy storage batteries and things like that that are going to be on the road and in every country. Just from the EVs alone, we're expecting 22 million meters cubed of waste per year to be produced from lithium batteries. And just to give you a feel of what that actually encompasses, so are these numbers on the left. So taking the Melbourne cricket ground, we would be able to fill 14 Melbourne cricket grounds per year with lithium waste. So it just really highlights that we need to improve this process, particularly because there aren't enough recycling capabilities developed. So we really wouldn't have a large amount of waste to deal with. So this is where Acceleron comes in. We have developed a patented battery design solution, which allows the battery to be maintainable and reusable throughout its lifetime. So it overall completely extends the lifetime of the battery up to 20 years if necessary. The cells, the BMS, each individual part in there can be reused and repurposed for either within a new battery or within a second life battery. So we produce batteries currently as a company for Africa, Caribbean, and the UK. And we have a range of different batteries for different technologies and different market needs. So typically in the UK and the Caribbean, we produce sort of home energy storage and commercial energy storage systems. In Kenya, we work with the waste centre there to take the waste that has been produced across the country that comes into the waste centre. We test those cells that would then just, typically go in the bin. And we've found up to 80% of those cells are fine to be put into new packs and can be used as second life packs. And they can work really well in sort of energy as a service models as well. So the way we do that is we collect those cells, as I've just said, from the WE Centre in Nairobi. we fully disassemble those packs, we test them thoroughly, which takes quite a large amount of time because there can't be any risks with batteries. And then any successful cells would be sorted, ready for grouping into particular packs that will then go on to be used in products. So what I would just like to now tell you about what we in particular do on the Energy Access Africa project. And really, we're very much focusing on the e-mobility side of things. So looking at how batteries can be used for e-mobility. And as I was going to follow Jono, I was going to be talking about some of the very nice things they're doing. But I'll leave that to him and just follow that they are producing an e-mobility battery, an e-mobility vehicle, sorry, and we are hopefully going to be providing the battery into that system. The fantastic opportunity for e-mobility throughout Africa has come from these three things that you can see on screen. So this is this slide in particular has been sourced from a McKinsey presentation they did for future mobility. And if anybody's interested, I can share that whole presentation afterwards. But particularly the regulatory push, which includes subsidies and incentives, as well as fuel efficiency and CO2 emissions targets, has really enabled a greater push from e-mobility from those internal combustion engines, which are obviously typically much dirtier and have far larger carbon emissions. Following this then, the other thing that's quite an advantage for e-mobility at the minute is the drop in cost of the batteries through things such as the raw materials that produce the cells that are needed for the batteries, and just the larger need for applications in general. So there's more demand, which brings the overall cost down. And finally, just the worldwide ramp up of models and EV production. So it just all has combined together to make it a really exciting area that's hopefully going to be developing quite a large amount in the coming years. So as I said, Mobile Power have produced a tuk-tuk version that you can see in the top corner there. And we would hope to produce batteries for this. So previously we have worked on Eco Charger, which is the quad bike that you can see in the bottom corner. And that product has enabled us to produce batteries that are really fit for the environment. So they're really rugged, they're experiencing a lot of vibration, and they're able to do the distances that would be expected. So we have taken the learnings from that project and produced the essential battery that you can see on the left. And we're hoping that that is going to fit very nicely into their product that would enable the servicing of the batteries throughout their lifetimes. So to fit really well into the business model of the overall e-mobility project. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for your time and looking forward to any questions at the end. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Laura, and for stepping in seamlessly when we needed you to. So I now have Jono's slides loaded up here, so I'll be doing the slides and Jono can be telling me to advance them at the right time. Over to you, Jono, and I will start screen sharing your slides. So Jono West is the co-founder and chairman of Mobile Power, who have been doing some amazing work on battery rental and distribution. And Jono is also very interested in promoting sustainable business and entrepreneurship at the bottom of the pyramid. Over to you, Jono, and let me know when you need your slides moving on.
Great. Yes, thank you. So as I was saying, we specialize in distribution of power, and we at the moment focus mostly on solar electricity, but we're very excited to do some projects with pyrogenesis. So let's move to the next slide, Bernie. And so the project, the pilots for this project were testing whether there was a good product market fit for the Mopo battery rental system. And so we installed 3 hubs over the life of the project, and one in Tubmanburg, which was so good, we installed another one right next door to it, and then one other in Gabar. So if you go to the next slide, Bernie. But the way these hubs are installed is that we're designed for rapid scale. So we have our installation team who travel in one 4x4 vehicle, and they can install a hub every 5 days, even in the rainy season. This month we've already done 4, in July. And so these guys go in, they meet with community leaders, they choose a community building, put the solar panels on top. And initially we were looking at sort of prefabricated containers and security guards, but by doing it with the local community, it means we have yet to have anything stolen. So on to the next slide. Inside the hub, there are these Mopo charge units, and they charge these 50 watt-hour batteries. And these are able to charge, say, 6 smartphones. They have a 12-volt boost, which they can run off these rapid charge ports to watch TV, and there's a built-in lamp as well, which can run for 24 hours. So on average, there's 300 of these batteries in a hub, and we employ 4 agents, 2 men and 2 women, and these are the 2 ladies in Tubmanburg. Next slide. So we have a pay-as-you-use business model. So the idea is there's 0 barriers to entry, so we don't ask for credit checks, we don't ask for a deposit, and there's no fixed payment structure. And importantly, customers can pay in cash because mobile money penetration is low. The system also works where there's no phone coverage because we use an NFC technology to activate the batteries. So therefore, we can reach these customers in these rural, unbanked areas where there's no phone signal and they rely on seasonal income. And the batteries have a security technology where they are activated using an Android app and an NFC wristband. You can see there an agent activating the battery for use. And therefore, we can track the battery throughout its life and throughout the rental cycle. And that enables us to incentivize rapid return of the batteries and make the thing commercial. So if we go to the next slide. So our average customers, well, this is an example of a customer in Tubmanburg, a lady called Anita. So she rents a battery to charge her phone and play music at the fish market where she works. She also uses it as a torch on her way home, and then when she's home, she can charge everyone else's phones overnight. And because she's not tied into a contract, she doesn't have to rent the next day. She can just wait until she's made enough profit to do that again. So she's not committed, and this is one thing customers talk about a lot. Another major customer value proposition is the fact they can keep their mobile phone with them at all times. They don't have to leave them at charging centres or telecentres, which means that they don't miss out on business or communication, and also they don't have their phone tampered with. So next slide. As part of Innovate UK's projects, we've focused very strongly on gender equality and done a lot of work on trying to support women to become agents. And this is an example of one of the agents, Rebecca. And we have a gender equality support officer, a lady called Bintu, who's in touch with all these ladies and provides them with training and ongoing support. And actually, the findings from our Energy Catalyst projects are that women actually make more money than men on average, and are more reliable and work better in a rota system, so much better for the way the hub works. So that's been a real good finding. Next slide. So yeah, we're pretty excited by the Liberian market. There seems to be a good product market fit. We've rented a battery out over 60,000 times now. We've had lots of good customer feedback, mostly wanting more batteries, bigger batteries, and more hubs. And we are in a place now where we're bringing out a larger kilowatt-hour battery to fit that demand. Next slide. And the customer sort of feedback has been that the main impact has been reduction of costs and time when they have to charge at telecentres or phone charging kiosks. We've worked out to about 70% cost saving on average. for using our Mopo battery rather than charging on a genset. It provides a light for keep your shop open after dark or for studying, and improves people's security. So yeah, there's good impact as well as a good product market fit. And final slide. Okay, sorry. So this is just an example of our dashboard. I was going to show you it actually on my screen and talk you through it, but this is basically the data we're getting back from one of the hubs, and you can see it's pretty stable. Generally, the rentals are very good and very high utilization rate. So that's a very healthy hub. Okay, and our final slide is our learnings from pyrogenesis. So we've seen that this is a good product market fit, and this battery as a service model works well in Liberia, and the unit economics are sufficient to be able to attract debt finance. And the location is key. Trying to position the hub in an area of high population density means that it works better, and therefore if pyrogenicists are looking at putting into hubs where there's plenty of agricultural waste, that they may need to run a wire to the nearest community, a wired connection. And just finding that we've prioritized hiring women as agents. So that's a key finding for us. So yeah, we really appreciate the opportunity of being part of this project and partnering with you all. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much for that, Jono, sharing that technology with us, and in particular the tremendous impact that something like that is able to generate on the ground. So without further ado, I'll just invite people to ask any more questions if they have any more before we have our final presentation before the Q&A session. And that final presentation comes from Andrew Ratiko, who is the CEO of Mobinet Group and is going to talk to us about mobile payment systems.
Thank you very much, Bernie. I'm just trying to get the. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bernie. And to just proceed as played. So basically, we're a mobile payment solution system, and we focus in Africa. Generally, our goal at Mobinet is to enable individuals across the continent to benefit financially and socially from the advancement of technology. Our objective as part of this consortium is to build and maintain a mobile payment system for the purchasing of energy, basically electricity in West Africa, focusing on Sierra Leone, Liberia, and other rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa. Presentation will cover three main areas: offline real-time payments, agency banking, and quick response codes, basically QR codes. Starting off with offline real-time payments. Internet is not essential, but we've all known in Africa, cash is king, but digital is growing. Cards and POS devices that were very, very popular prior to the onset of the pandemic, and have played a significant role in accelerating digitalization of payments. All over the continent, banking apps continue to grow, especially in the current climate, but we do know they're limited by the need for internet connection. We've built a payment system called SimPay, which uses encrypted SMS as the transportation layer of information between sender of information and a receiver's mobile device. Payments are completed seamlessly and securely without the use of the internet on both feature phones, smartphones, on networks as low as 2G, which is basically some of the environments which we play in. Majority of people in Sierra Leone and Liberia, which we focused on, live in rural areas where internet penetration is quite low. They work in the informal sectors as farmers, traders, and so on. And it was clear during this project that the infrastructure development in rural areas significantly behind those in urban areas. So technology has to be used to bridge the gap in providing the same opportunities to others. In Sierra Leone, for example, majority of residents in Konaidugu, they're farmers, and they have to travel to neighboring districts to make use of commercial banking facilities. And with SimPay itself, these farmers can now execute transactions using their mobile phones in the comfort of their homes. They can carry out payments for services such as electricity, which is why we're part of this consortium. Other additional services includes transfer of funds to other beneficiaries and topping up and buying phone credits. Now, one of the subsets of this has been the result of agency banking. Agency banking itself is the provision of financial services through third-party agents, who are not your traditional bankers or financial institutions. The main aim of agency banking is to drive financial inclusion. And a byproduct, which we realized, was the creation of employment. So with these agents, you can carry out certain services such as opening of accounts, checking of balances, making bill payments, in this particular case, electricity, doing cash deposits and withdrawals, as well as various statement services. And when we're talking about creating employment, we need to talk about how people make money from this, which is basically via commissions. Some of the agents get paid on a per transaction basis, while others get paid on a monthly settlement system. Talking about financial inclusion, which is one of the main aims or the benefits of agency banking. Financial inclusion is simply the availability and equality of opportunities to access financial services. Individuals, businesses, they can access appropriate, affordable, and timely financial products and services, which includes banking, loans, equity, insurance products. Using the right technology for the right environment is critical to Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, Ghana, all the countries that exist in Africa. SIMPay itself, which is based on encrypted SMS and negates the need for internet penetration, is key in driving financial inclusion. We understand the impact of agents. They're closer to the communities that was previously excluded from financial services. The agents are known to users and people that live in these communities. They're trusted, and they're actually used as the first point of knowledge sharing. And this has been the case where in Sierra Leone, when people had to purchase electricity by connecting to EDSA, they actually speak to the agents first prior to actually going to the banks or doing anything else. I mentioned QR codes, quick response codes. So we know during this whole pandemic, a lot of organizations have pushed to cashless payments. Even the World Health Organization highlighted digital cashless payments as a means of conducting transactions to create a safer environment. COVID-19 crisis has also played a huge role in driving innovation in service delivery. For example, promoting government-to-person payments. A big case or example is the NQR payment solution in Nigeria, which is being done by NIMS. It's an example of how financial industry has embraced innovation on the African continent. Basically, where payments can be made peer-to-peer or from end users to merchants, simply using mobile phones and QR codes. QR codes itself, they protect your information, everything is secure, and you can actually make payments to anybody as long as they have a QR code, which can be generated directly via their banks or via links from providers of various solutions. We've been using QR codes for years in Sierra Leone with the likes of GT Bank, Royal Commercial Bank, and we've used it for agency banking with some of our other banking partners. I said the solution itself enables consumers to make instant payments from wallets, cards, bank accounts by simply scanning QR code payments with their mobile devices. So, what were the challenges and opportunities in what we've learned from this project? Challenges itself, it was clear that there was a large digital infrastructure gap when comparing urban and rural areas, comparing places like Freetown to Konaidu Green North. There was a lack of high quality, affordable and reliable financial services because everything was very cash heavy. Everybody depended on cash. You had situations where people would draw out cash from banks just in order to make payments to merchants that was 5 minutes away. Lack of financial literacy in rural areas, as well as limited electricity, which is one of the main solutions that this project is pushing towards. Other challenges which we found in the project, speaking to people, was the lack of managerial skills in certain businesses, lack of finance for growth, lack of innovation. There was a lot of political and religious issues. The economy itself was a challenge, environmental challenges, as we said, and there was massive poor infrastructure. Hence, technology has to be used to bridge the gap. Opportunities. It is possible that governments in sub-Saharan Africa, in partnership with private sector, can set up innovation funds to support your micro, small, medium enterprises in innovation and harnessing of technologies. SSA, sub-Saharan Africa, has a huge young workforce, and these guys can be gainfully employed across multiple sectors as part of the digital revolution. This is the case in Sierra Leone, it's the case in Ghana, it's the case in Liberia, and also Nigeria, with a significant young workforce. Solutions, what do we think can happen in the near future? We must use the right technology for the right environment by designing timely solutions based on the requirements of local users. There's no advantage to having 5G phones when the network infrastructure itself is based on 2 or 3G. Digitizing the ecosystem to stop consumers cashing out at banks and agents with merchants. I previously said you have situations where people queue in banks for hours on end just to pull out their cash and then spend the cash at merchants 5 minutes away. We have to focus on reforms, addressing the digital infrastructure gap, focus on affordability, as well as digital literacy. Implementing policies that protect the livelihoods of informal vendors, especially in urban areas, rather than using the ongoing pandemic as a means of harassing them. And finally, now more than ever, I believe fintech is poised to become a crucial stepping stone that will propel Africa into becoming a truly digital economy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we can continue with questions and answers at the end of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew, and that's a very appropriate place to finish our set of 5 presentations with a discussion of how people can pay for these exciting new services. We're now going to move on to the Q&A and discussion session. So I will, after thanking all of our 5 presenters there, I'll ask them to share their video feed again, share their cameras again, and we can then probe them with some of the questions that you've been asking online. And please, by all means, do keep the questions flowing from all of our attendees there. So the first one, we've heard about a lot of new technologies and new business models here in the 5 presentations. But if we're trying to understand the impact in Sierra Leone and in Liberia, it would be good to know what practices and what technologies we're hoping to displace. So how do people normally charge their phones at the moment in rural areas in these countries? How do people get lighting, for example, for their houses? Jono, if you want to kick us off on that.
Yes, so if they can't afford a generator, I think only about 5% of the population in Liberia have a generator that they own, or they can't afford solar panels, then they have to take their phones to a telecenter or a phone charging kiosk, and then they leave them there sometimes for most of the day, and then have to wait for them to be charged. I think the highest price I found in Sierra Leone was 35 cents to charge one phone, so it's too expensive for what you get. And then for lighting, most people use torches, like AA batteries for a torch, or a D-cell battery, and some places there's still oil lamps, paraffin lamps, but generally it's torches for lights.
Right, I'll ask the other presenters for their views in a second, but just to understand your answer there a bit better, Jono, as you're saying, they're going to a centre to get these things charged, so those centres probably won't be in their own villages necessarily, will they?
Not necessarily. They're often in towns, so yeah, it can be a long walk. So people can spend the whole day just to try and get their phone charged. So yeah, it's definitely a huge waste of time. Which is why if we can get these hubs in every village, then it saves people a huge amount of time as well as money.
And for our other presenters, do you have any insights into what sort of practices or what technologies we're displacing? Maybe Laura, the traditional battery technologies that people are using, or traditional payment systems, Andrew?
Yeah, I'll take the so typically frequently the batteries are lead acid, which are, have been the incumbent technology for a long time, and though they work fantastically, they are a lot heavier. Typically often 3 times heavier than lithium batteries. So if people are purchasing batteries and or renting batteries and carrying them back to their home, obviously a lithium battery would work quite a lot better there. And in particular, lithium batteries typically have very much longer lifetimes as well. So it usually works in a business model when you're considering the total cost of ownership. Although the lithium batteries have higher costs initially, it can work out a lot better over their lifetime.
Thanks, Martin. And Andrew, how are people paying at the moment?
From a payments perspective, you still have issues in certain parts where people actually have to go and buy a voucher, which is scratched off, and then that's loaded onto their phones, as the case might be, just to then use for either for payments, either for transfers. But since this is for merchant payments, it's still the same process. But with such solutions or new solutions like what we've been doing in Sierra Leone for quite a while, everything is now being done digitally. So, but it's one of those situations where everything has to be scaled, and you need a complete digital ecosystem to make sure there's the right impact. Because as I said, there's no point in you going to your bank or an agent, pulling out cash and paying the cash to somebody that's 5 minutes away from you. If we have that complete ecosystem, then everything can be done digitally without you having to spend hours queuing in the bank in the first place.
That'll make a huge difference. Thank you all for that. So the second question is about what exactly, as a result of this project, you're proposing would happen in rural communities. So on the one hand, with the pyrochemy technology, we're talking about setting up mini grids. On the other hand, looking at all the battery technologies, it's a battery rental business. Is it one or the other, or can those be integrated? Simon, maybe to kick us off on that.
No, definitely there's plenty of scope for integration, Bernie. And in one of our other projects, it's we're looking at how we can extend the grid by using battery rental model. So it boils down to first of all the population density, the energy consumption that's available in an area, the cost of putting in the infrastructure, the availability of the right kind of feedstock in the crop waste. So that's why we're starting by looking at initially working with agri-food processors or like clusters of artisan food processors. So this actually links in with the previous question, which is like both artisan food processors and factories can use tend to use firewood, or in factories they might use diesel for generating heat as well. So because heat is one of our products, we can supply heat as a service to those communities, and hopefully that is going to result in reduced use of firewood or diesel, even worse, for providing them with heat. So really, then distributing the electricity, especially where there's very low energy use as a starting point, as I said previously, it's not going to make economic sense to spend a lot of money putting in the infrastructure for a mini grid to do that. So batteries are a much cheaper, quicker, easier way to get power to what are low population density areas, or lower population density than would have a viable business case normally.
And thoughts maybe from our colleagues on the battery side about the combination of the two systems.
Yeah, I think for us, it's about the infrastructure costs, as Simon said. So AMDA, the sort of African Mini Grid Association, says the average cost of a connection to a house in Africa is $735, and on average they only spend between $2 and $4 a month. So it's a huge capex expenditure with very little revenue, whereas they're using the same amount of electricity that are in our batteries, and we can provide them with that electricity at a fraction of the cost. So they can work together, and we are partnering with mini grid companies, but just generally it's just a completely different scale of price for the capex costs.
Sure.
Just to really quickly add, I think as you can probably tell, looking at the companies that are involved in this talk today, and how we're obviously very keen on working together, I think it really is important that overall there is just a combination of different technologies available, because there are so many different opportunities in Africa, and particularly in areas where they might have, you know, some grid access or no grid access. You know, every situation is very different. So although we might seem like competitors looking at us, at the companies, I think in reality we're all likely to work together really well, which is hopefully what we've seen across this project. Great,
thanks for that. So a question that's just come in the last couple of minutes from one of our participants, and they're specifically asking pyrogenesis, but I think it's an equally interesting question for some of our other presenters, is how scalable are your technologies? So if projects or communities are looking for biomass solutions greater than 100 kilowatts, or if they're after more than the standard number of batteries, Jono, in one of your hubs, how scalable are those systems?
Well, in our case, our system is a containerized system. So, you know, we would just add in parallel, you know, the number of containers that are needed to provide, you know, so like if it was a 1 megawatt requirement, then we would have 10 systems. That also actually builds in fault tolerance. And in some cases that even benefits by having an array, so that array is a very much more robust way of generating and distributing electricity, so that if one part of the network goes down, the other part, you know, you've still got coverage across a wider area. So that would be our first approach, rather than upscaling above 100 kilowatt. There's also various regulatory constraints and issues. Definitely in Nigeria, if you go above, you know, 100 kilowatts, you're then into a completely different regulatory regime. And as anybody knows who, you know, is trying to work, you know, in certain countries in Africa, when you start becoming embroiled with the formal systems, that can slow you down and, you know, cause all sorts of complications. And typically investors want to see quick returns. So the quicker that you can deploy your solution and start generating income and then getting that income back, you know, in terms of profit, the better, rather than becoming embroiled in lengthy contractual negotiations, which might be very complex as a result of the regulatory framework as well.
Jono?
Yes, I mean, ours is definitely scalable. We're looking at this, launching this 1 kilowatt hour battery, which the guys behind me are working on for the e-mobility piece. And as Laura said, we're working with them as well for an electric tuk-tuk. So I think as the amount of electricity produced by, say, pyrogenesis increases, we would then bring in a range of batteries so people can climb the energy ladder with sort of very, you know, with appliances that have batteries that run them right up to the transport level where most energy use occurs in rural areas. So I think the electric motorbikes we're trialing in Sierra Leone are undercutting the gasoline motorbikes, even though the price of fuel is heavily subsidized by the government. So I think that's the massive market that's going to unlock a huge amount more of these renewable energy sources.
Sure. And the flip side of that question then, is there a minimum size of community that all of your different technologies are appropriate for?
Well, for mobile power, we're still at the low-hanging fruit stage, so we haven't had to try the really, really small communities, the hamlets. But I think we could go down to sort of 50 batteries and just see whether that works. But right now, the demand is so great, we just go for those locations that we can install quickly and begin making a return.
And Simon?
In our case, I mentioned a community of about 5,000 individuals. it equates to, when we look at the amount of biomass that's produced by those communities, typically if they're cultivating around 400 hectares of land, that's just as a rough average, that should generate enough biomass to provide the feedstock to supply one of our systems for a whole year. So that comes to just under 900,000 kilowatt hours, which in African terms is a huge amount of electricity. And this is why we've been ideally where we're starting, because typically that's quite a lot of electricity for a rural village. Looking at working with agri-food processors to start with, and the communities that are part of their supply chain, so that we can link them all together. And then also, because we are either in electricity generating mode or heat production mode, we can therefore, figure out which blend is going to suit, the demand best, so that, it can be like an optimized solution that we provide into the communities that we're hoping to serve. And then, of course, the other bit that we're working on at the moment is to develop the biofuels aspect, so that if they don't really require that much in terms of, electricity, for instance, then they can be, converting their waste into biofuels and exporting and generating income from those biofuels. And then, as the electricity demand grows, then we would switch to more electricity generation.
So that relates to another question we had, which was very specific on how does the system benefit farmers in rural communities?
Well, in our case, solar PV mini grids are great because they bring, energy access to those communities, but that's, pretty much all they bring. In our case, we're creating jobs because we need people to go and gather the waste, aggregate it into, consignments. We typically would be using 6 tons a day for one of our systems. So that's going to create employment locally. Another way, of course, is by, working, with farming communities to contract them to make sure that we've got that waste in advance. So they're going to start generating additional incomes that they didn't have access to. And become exporters of higher value products from those communities. Typically, communities will be just selling their primary production without having any opportunity to upgrade it. So speaking to, say, for instance, cashew nut farmers in Nigeria, they just sell their raw cashews for next to nothing. Now, if anybody knows how much a packet of it's 100 grams of cashews costs in the UK or Europe, it's a lot of money. You could buy, kilos of that. And that's typically because they don't have electricity to drive the processing equipment, and they don't have the heat to also, roast the cashews, for instance. So there's an example where we provide both the electricity and the heat that these farming communities can then use to start upgrading their primary production, even if it's just to dewater and to dry that stuff so that it has a longer shelf life, will mean they're able to add value to their primary production, and that will retain, greater profits in their communities than just, sticking it on a truck and sending it to the nearest factory. The benefit is they also get electricity as well in the process.
Of course. And that leads us on to actually a couple of questions that we've had in about sustainability in general. So really for all of the different presenters, how sustainable, how green would you say your technologies were, both in comparison to, say, something like solar power, or to the existing technologies or energy sources that are being deployed at the moment?
I always like what Laura tells us about lead acid batteries and how horrendous they are to recycle. And
so lead acid are actually really easy to recycle because they've been around for so long. However, there's obviously so many benefits to lithium. So that the one kind of downside to it is the lack of recycling and ability to reuse. So that is really our USP, and where our sort of how we differ from every other lithium company, in that we're lots more sustainable. And so typically when we're considering how sustainable we are compared to potentially people who would use the grid, we look at the carbon emissions that are caused from the grid in that particular country, and we can do comparisons that way to look at the carbon emissions there. We're also trying to look at a life cycle analysis at the minute, because typically they run from cradle to grave, so the beginning of the product life to the end of the product life. And because we then extend the product beyond its first life, life cycle analysis don't really yet take that into account. So we're working with some universities in the UK to try and really figure out exactly how much good we're doing, but hopefully it's quite a lot. So I think that hopefully answers it from Acceleron's point of view.
And from Pyrogenesis' point of view, environmentally, the biochar that we produce, as I said, the really interesting use of that biochar is when it's sequestered into agricultural soils, because that, of course, increases the nutrient retention and the moisture, the water retention of those soils. So that, at the same time, therefore, is meaning farmers need to use less fertilizers, and fertilizer production is heavy greenhouse gas emissions associated with that. And also, of course, water, there's a lot of pumping that goes in, energy used for pumping water as well, Bernie. So, if you've increased your moisture retention of the soil, you don't need to use so much water on it, because the biochar acts as a sponge. Now, putting biochar into soil for that kind of application means the plant has actually played a role in helping to develop a carbon negative or a carbon removal system. Because hopefully, most people are aware that, plants will absorb carbon dioxide in a gaseous form from the atmosphere. They'll convert it into the solid plant matter. And then, when we pyrolyze that plant matter, we convert that into a stable solid form of carbon, an inert form of carbon. Because, of course, if you leave the plants, they'll rot. But this biochar, once you sequester it into soil, or you can use it in construction materials, it's then kind of like a solid form of stable carbon that is locked away from the atmosphere, won't return to the atmosphere in many cases for up to 1,000 years. So that means using our technology, we're literally sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. And this is something that a lot of people are only just becoming aware of. As I said, the difference between carbon offsetting and carbon removal. So I recommend you go and watch that very good video produced by Maria and Catalina on our website, and they'll explain how that works. But for achieving net zero, you need technologies that are going to literally suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and lock it away from the atmosphere for at least 100 years. And so this is one of the most powerful features of what Pyrogenesis is offering. And this is what's getting a lot of, especially, investors very excited about recognizing that this is a way that they can finance infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa. Infrastructure that's going to give sub-Saharan Africa energy access, but also is going to help solve the global warming issue for everybody else. Yeah, because there's not very many very commercially viable carbon removal technologies available at the moment. There's a lot of offsetting, but that will not help us achieve net zero. So environmentally wise, we need to be able to distribute power cheaply, affordably, cleanly. That's why we've teamed up with Mobile Power, with Acceleron. We need, to provide people with the ability to, pay for that easily. That's why we've teamed up with MobiNet. We need to know that the right type of biomass and the right quantities are available in the right place. That's why we've teamed up with Professor Kevin and University of Leicester. So, this was a brilliant project where we're just showcasing what can be achieved. So, when we get the resources to basically scale this up and roll this out across sub-Saharan Africa, hopefully we're going to be leading the way in showing people, what this net zero future looks like. And it's a net zero future that everybody will benefit, especially communities who are rural, off-grid, need access to energy, but can help solve the world's problem by decarbonizing through this model that we've developed.
Great, thanks for that. A related point for Kevin. I know you answered this question earlier on a one-to-one basis, Kevin, but we had a question about climate change and the extent to which climate change will affect some of the models, the remote sensing technologies that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think a brief answer. I think, you know, we read in the news every day. There's an event. There's wildfires. There's drought. There's floods. There's disease outbreak, which all affect crop yield. I think our view of sub-Saharan Africa is that agricultural activity is very well distributed. We've got crop and agricultural maps that gives us confidence about the spatial distribution. We can now use this tool to look at the temporal distribution, the depth of agricultural activity. Looking ahead, these satellites will be with us into the future. European Space Agency has made a commitment through the Copernicus project to provide these operational satellite observations now. Many organizations, many industries and governments rely on these data sets to help them make decisions, so we can continually assimilate observations into these models, understand when something's happening, and maybe even into the future, start using these as kind of predictive indicators. Because what I didn't point out on some of the plots that we showed is that we can understand what is the latest situation with the photosynthetic activity of the crop to the image that was collected probably yesterday or even earlier today, if that image was available and cloud free. Because now we can get this information, we can identify there's a deviation from what might be the norm, and maybe alert people on the ground or part of a wider network of contacts that something's happening in this field, and maybe there's some mitigation or even adaptations that can be made to better suit the climate and the environment. So from our technology perspective, we should be able to see a signature of climate change and hopefully support as much any impact mitigation.
Thanks very much for that. Okay, everybody's been talking about some really exciting technologies and models that are being applied on the ground in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So, in fact, the first question that we were asked during the webinar was, how are you proposing to work with local NGOs, for example, or local organizations, local companies who are active in the energy access space, or how can those organizations, those local NGOs, get involved with what you all are doing?
Right. Well, first, I'd like to just say thank you very much for that question. That's a great question. Today, hosting this webinar, that's one of the tools that we're using to reach out and engage local organizations. We've all been predominantly based in the UK. I'll be relocating to West Africa this month to lead, the next stage of our development, commercial development, and that's so that I can get into the field and start developing those relationships with organizations, with communities. The next stage will be that we're going to be moving our prototype to West Africa as well for testing those cross-crop wastes in country to make it a lot easier for people to send us examples of what they produce. We can run it through our machine. We can tell them, right, for every ton of the waste that you produce, this is how much electricity, this is how much heat, this is how much biofuels we can give you back. And then therefore we can work out what the commercial case is for a community or for a manufacturer. So anybody that's looking to, mobilize communities, mobilize industries in their area, we're really keen to hear from you. So via this webinar, via the social media postings that we put out on a weekly basis, via our website, we're trying to reach out and engage with interested stakeholders on the ground. Then the work that we've done, through this project and other projects across Africa as well that we've been delivering and leading on, that's helped us to develop, partnerships on the ground, in-country capabilities. And also, part of that is to make sure that we can identify commercially viable locations. We can develop the business case that gives investors or financiers the assurances that they're looking for. Because at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to pay the bill, to put this infrastructure in place. So part of what we've been developing is the way to make a compelling business case to financiers and investors that, look, in these communities, they may not currently have a credit rating. So that's why the work that Andrew's doing is so important, because once you have a community that starts to demonstrate it can pay regular bills and you've got financial data, it starts having a credit rating. And then that starts giving a lot of people with money the assurances that this community can afford this level of investment. So all of it is linked together, and there's a lot of different actors that need to come together, and become part of a supply chain, because that's effectively what you're seeing here. You're seeing the birth of a supply chain, and like Laura said, we don't have to. The opportunity is so large. There's no need to compete. The opportunity is so large that if we all cooperate, my goodness, it's just like, I just get excited thinking about it. So we're always looking to cooperate and collaborate rather than compete, because the opportunity is massive if we know how to work together.
And Jono, any local NGOs or companies are interested in?
Yes, yeah, we work with a range of local NGOs in Sierra Leone and in Liberia, and always open for a conversation. World Hope International, who are one of the largest in Sierra Leone, actually incubated us and helped us launch and helped us with our gender empowerment training and the way we can support the women. So we've really benefited from that and from the NGO community. So always open for a conversation.
Great. Andrew?
I think one of the things that's been very useful for us in Sierra Leone and now Liberia is speaking to a lot of, let's say, the farming community. Because one of the main things that happen with NGOs is some of their end users, you want them to be in a position where there can be a government to end user payment directly. So this is where the payment infrastructure comes in. So, and in terms of building credit, which what Simon talked about, it helps when you have access to the number of transactions that's being done. So at least your banks, your clients, your investors know that you're doing X amount of transactions on a monthly basis. If you were given an access to further funding, you might increase it by 10%, 20%. So we're always willing to work with local organizations, be it financial organizations or not, and learn from them, as well as share knowledge that we've gotten from other rural communities with them.
Great. And finally, Laura, if local energy access organizations want some of your great batteries?
Yeah, we'd absolutely love to. So our most local place is Kenya, so quite far away. But we, yeah, absolutely looking forward to working with others in different regions as well. So anybody is interested for some circular economy with batteries, please do get in touch.
I'd just like to add as well, Bernie, I can see Dr. Bola Siru on the call from the Federal Institute of Industrial Research, Oshodi, otherwise known as FIRO. Hello there, Bola. Good to see you. They were one of our project partners in Nigeria, and they specialize in fabricating, designing and fabricating equipment. So we're always really keen to work with such organizations on the ground, because in that case, in that project, which was Rural Industrialization via Energy Technologies, RIVET for short, we worked with Bola and FIRO to develop a Gary frying system that uses the heat that we produce, so that rather than using firewood, we could use the heat that's generated from our system, and that would, reduce the amount of deforestation that's been driven through firewood usage for these kind of activities, which I mentioned earlier. Both factories and artisan clusters of, Gary fries in Nigeria use ridiculous amounts of firewood. So if you have like, a capability in, on the ground that can, come up with a solution that can integrate. So in our case, with if it's cassava processing, maybe you've got some cassava processing machinery that we can hook up to our system. You become like a productive user of the heat or the electricity that we produce. We'd really love to hear from you, because it's such collaborations. We need applications we need things that are going to use the heat and electricity that we produce, and we produce a lot of it. So, mobile power, their batteries, they're an anchor load for the electricity that we generate. But we could use people, working with organizations that use a lot of heat as well. So we're very interested in hearing from people about collaborations. As I said, I'll be in West Africa, so I'll be able to travel right across West Africa. I'm a dual citizen, so I have a Nigerian passport as well as a British passport, which means I can travel very freely across ECOWAS countries without visa. So I'll be happy to come and meet up with people wherever you are, pretty much, and let's explore what we can do together.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Simon. And that, I guess that underlines for us all that part of the intention of this webinar was for it to be the start of a conversation between many of you who are listening to what the presenters have said and the companies that our presenters are representing. We hope that a lot of those conversations will carry on beyond the end of the webinar. We're overrunning by a few minutes, but I hope you'll forgive us. It's worth hearing some of this discussion and hearing some of the questions being answered. Our final question is a direct one to Laura about the reusable second life battery technology that you're developing, and exactly how that works, how the batteries are reactivated, and how that would work in terms of an end consumer who had one of those batteries. Would they sort of send it back to you or to a local service center, or would it be through a third party? Whether you could say a little bit more about that. And what
of course, yeah, thanks very much. So we have two options with our batteries. So we have first life products and second life products, but in reality, it would all work the same. So if the product was with an end customer, what we would aim to do would be to do sort of a live swap of the battery so that they don't have any downtime. So we would understand, hopefully within the next year through predictive maintenance, that their battery had something wrong with it. So we would be able to go to that customer and swap it out and give them a new one, and take that one away and then repurpose that ourselves. We're planning to do that in a few different ways, depending where in the world that customer is. So we can work with other businesses if they have their own customers that they would like to provide batteries to. We can either license our technology and train your engineers to be able to do the servicing themselves. Alternatively, we do plan to have our own service centres, which we already have in Kenya, so that we can do that for people. It really just depends on the best way that it fits for our customers, really. But we do have a few options around that.
Great, thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of our Q&A and discussion session. I would just like to thank all of you that have been participating and listening to the webinar for the last hour and a half or slightly longer. And of course, to thank again our 5 wonderful presenters: Andrew Otiko from Mobinet, Dr. Laura Alliston from Acceleron, John O'West from Mobile Power, Professor Kevin Tanzi from the University of Leicester, and Simon Igafose, the CEO of Pyrogenesis, who's also been leading the Energy Access Africa project that we've been talking about the results from on this webinar. If you haven't had a specific question answered, we can answer those, follow up those contacts after the webinar, or feel free to email us directly. This webinar, the recording of it, will be made available on the Pyrogenesis website in a couple of days, and you can see also copies of all the individual presenters' slides. And as I say, that will be on that page of the website in a couple of days. I'd like to thank you all again very much for attending. We do have another webinar about some project work in Ethiopia this time next week. Again, you can find out about that from the Pyrogenesis website and find out some more of the activities that they've been doing in East Africa. But again, we thank you very much for attending today, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.